Good morning. Thanks for being with us and engaging online today. My name is Dave Hyatt. I'm the pastor for local and global outreach at Hershey Free. And our mission at Hershey Free Church is that we believe a disciple of Jesus is someone who lives with Jesus, someone who loves like Jesus, and leads others to do the same. One of the best ways to live out that mission is by joining a small group, which we here call Live, Love, Lead groups. These groups are typically from 8 to 12 people and gather about twice a month to encourage one another, build friendships, and explore the Word of God together, and just do life together. One of our groups recently connected over Zoom to share their passion for their group and to talk about the benefits of being in a small group together. Here's their story.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deb Hinkle, and I, along with Nick Schatz, oversee our Live, Love, Lead groups here at Hershey Free. With me tonight are Jen Ryaby and Katie and Justin McComb, who are leaders of one of our Live, Love, Lead groups.
I know that there's people there that are listening and holding me accountable and are just there to pick me up when, you go through a rough period in life. And I love being able to get together and read scripture and kind of see how God's working in everybody in the group in a different way, like through the same scripture is kind of cool.
I would definitely encourage someone to join a Live, Love, Lead group because, like what Jen was saying, it's just like your most tight community and like you're walking with people who are in similar life stages. So we're facing similar challenges, we're asking similar questions. But even when we have differing viewpoints, that's just been so cool even through COVID. Like there's so much polarization in our community right now. And even within our Live, Love, Lead group, there's differing opinions, but like we can all come together on the truth, knowing that Jesus is reigning over us.
Being in relationships is something we're called to do. God is a relational God, and He wants us to be in healthy relationships. And I've just seen so much of that, so much of what God is doing in the world.
Well, thanks to Jen, Katie, and Justin for sharing. If you're interested in joining one of our Live, Love, Lead groups, I'd like to invite you to a starter group event. At this event, you'll have an opportunity to meet new people and even try a small group experience on. Our starter group event is today at 2 p.m. I hope to see you there. As we're approaching Easter Sunday, our theme for this Easter weekend is life renewed. This year has reminded us of our deep need for renewal and restoration. I invite you to come to our Easter experience to discover what it means to have a renewed life in Jesus. The Easter experience is an interactive walk-through journey created to provide you with space and time to reflect. This year, we've created an at-home Easter devotional to go along that will be similar to the Easter experience and that's being offered here in the building. You can find times and details about that at hfcinfo.com. In fact, all of this information and more can be found in the Sunday Bulletin at hfcinfo.com. You can also find the Sunday Bulletin, a link to give, sermon notes, all at the top of our church online service in the menu. If you're new with us today, I encourage you to fill out a Connect card in the Sunday Bulletin, or again, you can find that at the top of the church online page in the menu. And we want to be a place that you're encouraged. We want to be a place where your questions are answered, any questions you might have about the church, how you can get connected here at Hershey Free. And so as you fill that card out, we'll get back to you. And as a thank you, we'd like to send you a small bag of Haitian Pearl coffee. 100% of the proceeds from that coffee go to support Haitian missionaries around the world. And lastly, I want to thank you for giving to the ministry funds of Hershey Free Church. Your gifts make a huge difference, and each and every one of them is appreciated. Recently, a third stimulus package was approved, and maybe like me, are wondering what to do with that. My wife and I are prayerfully considering what to do with those funds. And as a reminder, if you have suffered financial hardship recently, such as job loss or lost wages due to the COVID-19 pandemic, please do reach out to our Compassion Ministries office for assistance. And as a reminder, you can give online at hfcinfo.com. Again, thanks for being with us today.
Good morning, Hershey Free. It's great to be with you. Let's celebrate our God together today. God, our hearts, our minds, and our bodies, and let's worship Him. 1, 2, 3, 4. breaks the power? Who breaks the power of sin and darkness? Whose love is mighty and so much stronger? The King of glory, the King above all kings. Who shakes the whole earth with holy thunder and leaves us breathless in awe and wonder? The King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is amazing love. That you would take my place, that you would bear my cross, you laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Who brings our chaos back into order? Who makes the orphan a son and daughter? The King of glory, the King of glory, who rules the nations with truth and justice, shines like the sun in all of its brilliance. The King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is amazing love. That you would take my place, that you would bear my cross, you laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy, worthy, worthy alone. This is amazing grace. This is amazing love. That you would take my place, that you would bear my cross, you laid down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. All that you've done for me. Let's declare this together. And grace, grace, God's grace, grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. And you came along, put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my fears and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. It's the God of the mountain, it's the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing, you give beauty for ashes, you turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing, you give beauty for ashes, you turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens, you turn bones into armies, you turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. You turn graves into gardens, you turn bones into armies, you turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens, you turn bones into armies, you turn seas into highways. You're the only one who cares. You're the only one who cares. You're the only one who cares. Amen. Follow along with me as I read this truth, and you will have a moment where we all read and declare this together. Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Let's read this together. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever. Amen.
In the darkness we were waiting, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom come and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. On the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe. For the souls of all who come to the Father are restored, and the Church of Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not faint. By His blood and in His name, in His freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.
Seen what you can do, oh God of wonders. Power has no end. The things you've done before, in greater measure, you will do again. 'Cause there's no prison wall you can't break through, no mountain you can move. All things are possible. There's no broken body you can't raise, no soul that you can't save. All things are possible. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival, let hope arise. Death is overcome, you've already won. Oh God of revival, rose in victory, and now you see forever on the throne. So why should my heart fear what you've defeated? I will trust in you alone. 'Cause there's no prison wall you can break through, no mountain you can move. All things are possible. There's no broken body you can't raise, no soul that you can't save. All things are possible. Yeah. Darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival, let hope arise. Death is overcome, you've already won. Oh God of revival, God of revival. Come awaken. Come awaken your people. Come awaken the city. Oh God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. Every stronghold will crumble. Hear the chains hit the ground. God of revival. is overcome. You already won, oh God of revival. Come awaken your people, come awaken your city, oh God of revival. Pour it out, pour it out. Every stronghold will crumble. I hear the chains hit the ground. God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. There's no prison wall you can't break through, no mountain you can't move. All things are possible. There's no broken body you can't raise, no soul that you can't save. All things are possible. All things are possible.
Hey, Hershey Free. My name is Nick Schatz. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and I'm so glad that you tuned in to worship with us online from your living room or wherever you are at the moment. Hey, before we get started with today's message, I have a couple of new members to introduce to you. So we have Josiah Joseph and Kayla Joseph. So if you've been coming here for a while, you've probably met them and bumped into them, but if you see them next time you're in the building, make sure you say, hey, welcome to the family as a member. So glad that these two can join us as members. One other thing I want to mention, you've already heard this announced, I believe, but we do have starter groups starting this afternoon, this Sunday on March 21st, 2 p.m. in the courtyard here. So, and I can't stress this enough, for those of you who are worshiping with us remotely and from your living rooms, if that is the only integration, if that is the only engagement you have with our church family, I strongly encourage you, if you are able to, if it is safe for you to do so, please come out and jump into a small group and get involved in actual biblical community with our church. I don't think you'll regret that. I'm going to be here, so I hope that you can join us for that. Okay, so for today's sermon, we are going to be reading from Jeremiah chapter 29. So Jeremiah was a prophet in Judah, and a prophet was a man or woman who spoke for God to God's people. And sometimes they had some pretty scary or shocking messages that they would deliver to God's people. And so we're going to actually look at one of the most shocking, or I would even say one of the most outrageous messages that Jeremiah the prophet had to give to his people. One of the most outrageous messages he ever delivered to them. And it was shocking for them. So let's read this together. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, also known as Yahweh, was their God. Because there were other gods in the land, I'm going to refer to God as Yahweh many times in the sermon. So this is what Yahweh Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Here's the message. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so they too may have sons and daughters. So have kids and grandkids, in other words. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So just kind of to sum up this section of Jeremiah's message, here's kind of what he's telling them to do. He's telling them, I want you to plant houses. God wants you to, build houses. He wants you to plant gardens and eat from those gardens. He wants you to marry and have kids and to have grandkids. He wants you to seek the peace and prosperity of the city and pray for the city that you are in. Now, if you were like me, you're probably thinking this is not a very outrageous message. This doesn't sound outrageous at all. This sounds almost peaceful. It sounds good. So why were the people so outraged when they got this message from Jeremiah? In fact, it gets even stranger because look at the next couple verses here, starting in verse 8. Jeremiah goes on in this writing. He says, yes, this is what Yahweh Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Here's the second part of this. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. In other words, there were other prophets in the land besides Jeremiah, many other ones, and they had a very different message they were delivering. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord, declares Yahweh. So there were other prophets in the land saying the exact opposite of Jeremiah. They were saying, don't build houses, don't plant gardens, whatever you do, don't have kids in this land, and do not seek the prosperity of this land. Instead, you should be in opposition to this land. You should be crossing your arms. You should be pointing your fingers. Whatever you do, don't have kids and settle down in this land. This is not going to be our permanent home. That's what the other prophets were saying. And so this absolutely outrage. I'm not going to have time to read this next verse, but this was an outraging message for God's people to receive from Jeremiah. You want us to build houses and plant gardens and then settle down in this land and have baby showers and wedding showers and to seek the prosperity of the land and to pray for its peace. You want us to do these things? It was an outrageous message. So here's my question for us today. Why were the people of Judah so outraged by Jeremiah's message? Once again, it doesn't seem like a message that should outrage anybody. Why were they so outraged by this message? Well, in order to answer that question, we need to go back and do a little bit of history lesson. We need to go back and learn a little bit about the history of what led up to this event. Now, for those of you who are not as familiar with the Old Testament, it can kind of be like watching a random Star Wars movie and picking up right in the middle. And you have all these questions, like who's the Galactic Alliance, and why are they trying to find this Luke guy, and what's with the baby Yoda? I mean, it can be confusing when you pick up a random Star Wars movie and try to figure out what's going on. You don't know the storyline. You don't know the history of why are all these people fighting with each other, right? Well, in order to help us understand this, in order to answer this question, I want to go very briefly through a history of what has come to this point when Jeremiah is living and writing this, okay? So when Israel first becomes a nation, they first become their own people with their own land following Yahweh, they go through a series of 3 kings. Saul was their first king. When Saul passes away, David becomes their second king. Now, David he comes up all throughout the Bible, New Testament and Old Testament, and he becomes kind of the measuring stick for what it means to be a godly king, a king that leads the nation, but also is wholeheartedly devoted to Yahweh and Yahweh's covenant with them, okay? He's a good king. When David passes away, Solomon, David's son, becomes the next king. And under Solomon's reign, the kingdom experiences their greatest days. I mean, amazing prosperity. The economy booms. It is a great time to be an Israelite when Solomon is king. Things are going well. Unfortunately, after Solomon passes away, everything goes downhill from there. And we are introduced to what I call the Boam boys. Okay, so after Solomon passes away, his son Rehoboam, that's the first Boam boy, he becomes the king. Now, there's also another guy named Jeroboam who was some kind of aide or an assistant, or he worked for Solomon in some capacity, and he ended up wanting to be king as well. So the civil war breaks out in the land, and what we call the United Kingdom becomes the divided kingdom because the nation splits in two. Okay, the northern kingdom maintains the name Israel, and Jeroboam is their king. Their capital city is in Samaria. Now, the southern kingdom, Solomon's son Rehoboam remains the king of that area, of the southern kingdom, and they take on the name of Judah. Their capital city is you've probably heard of Jerusalem. That's still their capital city. And what we see happen here is there's a series of kings that come and go. If you read 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you see each nation goes through about 20 different kings, and each of the kings is sort of measured against, are you as righteous as David, or were you as unrighteous as Jeroboam? We get good kings were compared to David, evil kings were compared to Jeroboam. I won't take time to read those texts there. But basically what happens is all the 20 kings that come and go from Israel, starting with Jeroboam to the very last king of Israel, they were terrible. They were terrible kings. They did not follow Yahweh. They did not remain faithful to the covenant. And so God removed his hand of protection over them and allowed a foreign nation, the nation of Assyria, to come in and take captive. So Assyria comes in, they defeat Israel's army, they besiege the capital city of Samaria, and they eventually they carry away the residents. They carry them away they deport them as migrants, as exiles, and take them into the land of Assyria to live in Assyria, which is, I can't picture it on this map. It would be too big of a map. But thankfully, Judah had a good king at the time. Their king was Hezekiah, and because they actually had a handful of good kings, most of them were actually wicked, unfortunately, after Jeroboam. They did not follow after David's righteousness. But there were some of the good kings here. Hezekiah was a good king at the time when Assyria came. And so God protected that nation. They remained a nation, and they had a few more kings come and go after that. Unfortunately, we get this message from God. Yahweh's great anger against Judah did not subside, and Yahweh announced, I will also spurn Judah just as I spurned Israel. And so a new superpower is around during this time. Assyria has been basically conquered by the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians was another name for them. Babylon comes into Judah, and Judah cannot withstand. They break down the walls, and they besiege the city of Jerusalem, and they do the same thing that Assyria did to Israel. And Babylon actually deports. They exile the people away from Judah in a few different waves, but they exile them into the land of Babylon. So with that history, it's a little easier for us to answer that question. Why were the Judeans so outraged by Jeremiah's message? Well, this answers our question. You want us to build houses and plant watermelon seeds and throw wedding showers and baby showers. You want us to settle down in this land? This is not our land. You want me to have kids in Babylon? You want me to have kids in this land? But my neighbors worship Marduk. You want me to have kids here? I don't want my kids in the school system here. See, you want me to pray for the peace of the city, but Babylon is wicked. The king is wicked. They worship other gods, and they have other laws that do not follow the law of God. I can't settle down in this land. You want me to seek the prosperity of this land? I'm hoping this land burns down. I'm hoping the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon is dethroned. I don't want to seek the prosperity of this city. I want to seek the opposition of this city. That's why the people of Judah were so outraged by this message that Jeremiah sent to them. I want you to build houses. I want you to settle down, seek the prosperity of the city. Man, they were ready to cross their arms and point their fingers. They did not want to follow that command from God. Now, again, in order to help us understand this, I want to ask this question. I wonder if any of you watching this, if any of the families watching this, have you ever been through a major move before? All right, have you ever moved from one place to another and you experienced a culture shock? And by the way, I've talked to some of you around here, and when you move from Hershey to Palmyra, that's not the kind of thing I'm talking about. I mean like a major move where you go through culture shock. By the time I entered high school, my mom and I had moved 14 different times, so I've had my fair share of new school districts and new bedrooms and living out of boxes and all that kind of stuff. And even in my adult life, I have lived in 5 different states, kind of dotted all around the U.S. Never in a different country, but throughout the U.S. My first major move to a different state, at least, was when I was 18. I left the house. I was born and raised in North Carolina and moved over to California. So that was a talk about a major culture shock. I come off the airplane and I'm waving at everybody, showing Southern hospitality, and nobody waves back. I'm thinking, man, are people mad at me? What have I done? I go to restaurants and I order tea, and they bring me this brown liquid that tastes like cold dirt. And at one place, I even said, hey, no, I was actually hoping for sweet tea. And the waitress, she points to these little blue packet thingies on the table and says, yeah, there's the sugar, the sweetener. And I almost lost it. I thought, no, I did not ask for chemically induced brown water. I want sweet tea. It was a major culture shock. My wife and I, we married after leaving California, and we moved straight to Indiana. And once again, I had a major culture shock. All right, we moved to this small city in the middle of rural Indiana, and the city had been infiltrated by corn. Corn, I mean, you would drive for miles and miles, and it's nothing but corn. It's just corn was everywhere. I even asked some of the people of the city that we had moved to, a city called Salem, hey, what are some things you guys like to do for fun? What are some hobbies? And different people would say they like to play cornhole, they like to do corn mazes. I thought, what? Hold on. Even your hobbies are based around corn? What is the deal with corn? It was a major culture shock. Then from Indiana, my wife and I, we moved to Dallas, Texas, and once again, it was a culture shock. There was no corn in sight, no corn whatsoever. We were living in like a concrete zoo, in other words. I mean, there were people everywhere, cars everywhere. Traffic was nuts. Everything was expensive. Everything was fast-paced, and it was intense for a little while. We ended up growing quite accustomed to it. And then we moved from Dallas up to Pennsylvania, right here in Hershey. And some of you, you're not going to believe this, but during the 5 or 6 years that we lived in Dallas, I never saw a single deer. I never saw a single deer, not a single time. Of course, I move up here and I can barely back out of my driveway without running into one because there's animals everywhere. In fact, I go to the hospital here in Hershey Med, and there's cows in the front yard of the hospital. There's animals everywhere. Of course, once again, I've grown to love this place. We love it here. But each of these major moves, there was a culture shock that happened, and it was hard to adapt to a new culture. Now, I say that somewhat in jest because what the Israelites did and what the Judeans went through moving to Babylon, all my moves were fun. All right, I've had an incredible life. What they went through was absolutely catastrophic. Catastrophic. This forced migration into this culture that was satanic in many ways. This is what one author puts. He says that this first generation of exiles, they experienced indescribable hardships, pains, and sacrifices. And believe it or not, throughout the Old Testament, throughout the entire Old Testament, it is infiltrated by this theme of exile. Of the major writing prophets, most of them, many of them, if not most of them, were writing anticipating the exile coming, or like Jeremiah, they were writing during the time of exile. Actually, Jeremiah lived before Israel was taken. He saw Israel go off to Assyria. He lived through a few kings here in Judah, and he also lived through the Babylonian exile. So he lived through all this stuff and was writing. So the major prophets, we're talking about Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Habakkuk, Zechariah, Daniel, all of these were major messages God was giving to his people about exile. Exile was a major theme. Not only that, but the first 5 books of the Bible that we generally attribute to Moses, those were actually, virtually all scholars would agree and propose now that the first 5 books of the Bible, as well as Joshua, Judges, Ruth, all these books, Psalms, they were actually composed after, or they were altered in such a way that they were composed in certain ways after the exile had happened. And there's hints of exile to come up. Genesis 11 being the Tower of Babel. Babylon wasn't a city at the time, but it makes its way into the Pentateuch. I mean, these were books that were affected by the exile when the people came back and returned. First Kings, Second Kings, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, these were obviously written after the exile, and they anticipate that and write with the exile in mind. The rest of the Bible speaks of the hardship that Judah experienced in returning to the land after 70 years of being there, so Ezra and Nehemiah, so on and so forth. The Old Testament is infiltrated by this theme of exile. And the exile was a crushing experience, not just for the generation that was exiled, but for their kids and their grandkids. They were in Babylon for 70 years before any of them were able to return to their land. So you have kids and grandkids being born in Babylon, growing up in Babylonian culture, attending Babylonian schools, receiving Babylonian education, that they're meeting and marrying young men and young women in Babylon and getting married and having children of their own. And all the while, these kids and grandkids are growing up, sitting at the fireplace, listening to mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, talk about the glories of the homeland. They're talking about how terrible Babylon is, how much they despise King Nebuchadnezzar, or the king at the time, and they're growing up with these mixed messages that they're having to sift through. This exile was a catastrophic experience for them. And that's why Jeremiah's message was so outrageous. Oh, here's a quote that I want to read to you from Tim Keller. He writes, "From Genesis 11, that's the Tower of Babel, all the way through Revelation, Babylon is represented as the epitome of a civilization built on selfishness, pride, and violence, the ultimate city of man. The values of this city contrast absolutely with those of the city of God. Yet here, the citizens of the city of God are called to be the very best residents of this particular city of men. God commands the Jewish exiles not to attack, not to despise, not to flee the city, but to seek its peace and love the city as they grow in numbers." So I would say there are at least 2 reasons why the people of Jeremiah's day bristled at this message. I think there were at least 2 reasons why they were so opposed, so outraged by Jeremiah's message that I want you to plant houses. Build. I keep saying that. I want you to build houses. I want you to plant some watermelon seeds, have wedding showers, baby showers. I want you to seek the prosperity of the city. I want you to settle down here. I want you to pray for this city. There were at least 2 reasons, I suppose, why the people were so outraged and opposed to that message, why they wanted to cross their arms and point their fingers and oppose the city rather than seek its prosperity. Here they are. They assumed that thriving spiritually equaled political power. Number 2, We'll come back to these. They assumed that faithfulness to God equaled opposition to everyone else. Let's take a minute and look at that first one. They assumed that thriving spiritually equaled political power. In other words, when the people of Judah heard Jeremiah's message to settle down and seek the peace and prosperity of this land, they had no category for that lifestyle. Like, you want me to build a house? I don't want to stay here. This isn't God's land. This is some other land. They worship Marduk here. You want me to raise kids in this area? I can't have kids here. I don't want kids growing up in the Babylonian school district. It's satanic. They teach astrology and the occult. They certify enchanters and magicians. I don't want kids being raised in this society. You want me to seek the prosperity of Babylon, but they don't even follow God's law. They have a law system and policies and legislation that's based on not God's law. I don't have a category for this. In order for God's people to thrive, we need a king that worships our God. We need legislation and policy that follows God's law. We need a people around us who share our values. I can't settle down here. That was the assumption. In order for us to thrive spiritually, we need to have political power. And of course, this can be the same thing that we assume as well. We need a Christian president, right? We need Christian policies and legislation. It's so easy for us to think the exact same thing that they assumed. They had no category for saying, no, I can thrive spiritually, while at the same time living in a place that, and having people in political power that are not of my same beliefs. They had no category for how that would work. I have found this as an interesting quote, one that was personally challenging for me that I want to read to you by Elliot Clark. He writes, if our collective Christian tone is complaint, if we continually lament our loss of cultural influence or social standing, if we weep and mourn as if Jerusalem has fallen or our chosen political agenda is overlooked, we expose our true values. That was convicting for me to read. Hey, listen, Hershey Free. In order for you and I to thrive spiritually, here's what you need to do. You need to live with Jesus, love like Jesus, and lead others to do the same. That's how you will thrive spiritually. It has very little to do with what's happening in culture. It has very little to do with what the Supreme Court is talking about. It has very little to do with what the White House is doing. It has very little to do with what colleges are teaching these days. In order for you to thrive spiritually, all you need to do is live with Jesus, love like Jesus, and lead others to do the same. Build a house, settle down, have kids, plant some watermelon seeds, throw a baby shower. You can live for God right here in this city. That's the message of Jeremiah. Okay? So, hey, they assumed that thriving spiritually equaled political power. Here's the second thing that I believe they assumed that made this so hard to accept Jeremiah's message. They assumed that faithfulness to God equaled opposition to everyone else. All right? Now, once again, I don't think the people of Judah had a category for this. They couldn't imagine a world in which you could be faithful to Yahweh and submit to Babylonian rule. How can I be faithful to Yahweh and submit to the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar? I don't know how I can do this. You want me not to fight? I thought the faithful thing to do would be to fight against Babylon. You can Jeremiah 21, the message from King Zedekiah, and you can read that on your own. Hey, we need to fight. And Jeremiah says, no, if you fight, you will die. You need to submit to Babylonian rule and be faithful to Yahweh. They had no category for this. How can we do this? You want me to serve God and also serve Nebuchadnezzar? But Nebuchadnezzar he tore down our temple, and he built himself a 90-foot golden statue. How can I serve him and also be faithful to Yahweh? They had no category for how this could work at the same time. And that's why I believe when they picked up this message from Jeremiah and read it, I would imagine they read it like this. Oh, pray for Babylon. Oh, I'm praying for Babylon. I'm praying that they fall and crumble. I'm praying that there's a coup. I'm praying a civil war. I'm praying that Nebuchadnezzar is dethroned. I'm praying for them. And they kept reading. You want me to pray for the prosperity and peace of this city? I'm not sure I can do that. They had no category for this. Hey, listen, Hershey Free. In order for you to be faithful to God, here's what you need to do. Live with Jesus, love like Jesus, and lead others to do the same. That's what you do. And our church will not do that effectively if we are known as the church in town that is against everything. We will not do that effectively if we are more interested in being the moral majority than being the missional minority. We will not be able to do this effectively if we are so focused on that. We need to build houses, settle down, raise kids, plant some watermelon seeds right here, and serve Yahweh, serve God right here in this city. You can do it at the same time as being faithful to God. So, hey, here's what Hershey Free needs to do. We need to apply Jeremiah's message to our world today. And so I want to give you a couple examples. One is the example of Daniel. Daniel was a young man who lived in Jerusalem when Babylon came to take them as exiles, and he actually moved into Babylon with them. So not only was Daniel given a new Babylonian name, not only was he educated in the Babylonian education system, he also had a federal job working for the capital city of Babylon. That was Daniel. And he was able to be faithful to God, faithful to Yahweh, at the same time as serving and integrating into the culture of Babylon. Now, when it came time that the king said, hey, you can't pray to your God anymore, he wasn't going to do that. When Nebuchadnezzar said, hey, I want you to bow down to my golden statue that I built, he wasn't going to do that. But he was still able. He understood that it is possible to thrive spiritually without having political power, without having influence in the political systems, the leadership of the nation as a whole. Another example, our perfect example would be Jesus, okay? Jesus lived hundreds of years after Jeremiah. Actually, it was after the exiles, the third generation of them, had come back to Judah. So he was in the land of Judah, right? But Judah was not in control. Roman authority was in control at the time. So they still felt like exiles in many ways. And there's this interesting story where someone approaches Jesus and he says, hey, Jesus, should we pay taxes to Caesar or should we pay tithe to God? Once again, he had no category for how you can pay taxes to Caesar and tithe to God. You can't honor Caesar and honor God at the same time. I don't have a category for that. He didn't understand how this could be done. And Jesus said, you should do both. In fact, the only way to remain faithful to God is to also render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. The two work hand in hand. Okay? Seek the prosperity of this city, not the opposition of this city. So listen, in order for you to thrive spiritually, you need to live with Jesus, love like Jesus, and lead others to do the same. Hershey Free, don't fall into the assumption that living spiritually equals political power. And don't fall into the assumption that faithfulness to God equals opposition to everyone else. Build houses, plant gardens, settle down, live for Yahweh, live for God right here in this city, and seek the peace and prosperity of the city as you do so. Hey, I just want to remind you, before the screen goes black, you're probably going to be tempted to think that church is over. I want to remind you that church isn't over because church is a people, and church is the people acting out the mission of God. You are the church. Church is far from over. In fact, church begins as soon as this screen goes black because you are living out the church. You are not going to be dismissed. Instead, you are being sent. You are being sent to seek the peace and prosperity of the land that you are in, remaining faithful to God while also living as good citizens in this land. Thank you. God bless.